Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 100 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. It's our Selection Sunday live reaction. It's March 16th, 2025. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. We've got Mike Koomar with us too, and Mike, what a interesting NCAA tournament bracket here. A real deviation from what some of the bracketologists thought would happen. What were some of your thoughts on the selection show?
Yeah, several stunning bids. I think a couple teams that should have been in that will not be playing in March, especially one shocker in West Virginia. We'll talk about right now. The AP 13th ranked team in the country, who went to their conference championship game, got an 8 seed. So that's a little shocking. That's Louisville. Memphis also, they win their conference. They're not seated very well. So I think a lot of concerning things from the committee, and certainly not what I expected in a lot of the field. So a little troubling, I would say, going into March.
Yeah, and we can get into the bubble later, and that's sort of a whole different discussion where, some things outside of basketball probably played into account there. But there's two teams that I want to talk about first that were seated very poorly, in my opinion, and I think you agree, Mike. Let's start with Memphis. They were predicted as my top 8 seed. They end up all the way up on the 5 line. Obviously, they had a good season. They did have some good non-conference, but some of their metrics suggested they were more on par with some of the bubble teams than a protected seed, which they nearly were. But you got to be shocked to see Memphis all the way up there at 5.
Yeah, I think it's a little surprising. At the end of the day, they did finish the season pretty well in conference play. They won most of all their games coming down the stretch. I think they finished. They won 15 of their last 16 conference games. But regardless, I agree, Sean. It's a little concerning, especially when you look at the margin of victory that they had within the conference. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty the entire season for Memphis. They kind of sputtered their way. They won games, and win is a win. I get that. But you also look at, they had a couple good wins in the non-conference, and that's probably what bolstered them forward. And that's wins over Michigan State, wins over Ole Miss, and Clemson were big for them. But you look at a team with a similar metrics like that as Louisville, and Louisville's all the way sitting down at an 8. And I think if those two teams had to play head-to-head, Louisville's probably going to win that game 7 times out of 10. And so that was a little concerning, and I actually think Memphis is on upset watch going into the tournament because they've played an entire conference schedule where, look, the conference isn't very good. North Texas is a good team. UAB is a good team. They got nothing else. Good job. They went 16-2. They didn't really play anybody important after early December. So,
and it's in this instance, it is pretty clear that the committee valued non-conference strength of schedule. Memphis has over the years done this where they've had to play a really tough non-con.
Yeah.
Mixed results in the past, but when you play so many good games, that's probably enough. They had a good conference season here, but Mike, I'm glad you brought up Louisville too, because I have pulled up a couple of the team sheets for these teams just for reference. I've got Memphis, Clemson, Louisville, and Gonzaga up. Now, the second two are on the 8 line, and the first two are on the 5 line. Let's take a look. Okay, so obviously, Memphis has a significantly higher net than the others. Clemson 22, Louisville 23, Gonzaga 8. Memphis is 48th in the net. Obviously, some teams higher than 48th did not get included in the field. The resume metrics are very good for Memphis, 18. That's pretty much on par with Clemson. Not as good as Louisville, and significantly better than Gonzaga. And then the predictives at 51.3 for Memphis. There are some bubble teams with better predictives than Memphis. Some teams that were not included with better than that. So the 6-1 quad 1 record is obviously very impressive when you take into account that 7 of their wins were in quad 4 losses outside of the top quadrant. It's extremely interesting to see Memphis up there at the 5. I can get an argument for a 7 seed maybe with that 6-1 quad 1 record, but looking at it again, Mike, this is truly sort of unexplainable that Memphis ended up 3 seed lines higher than Louisville and Clemson, with pretty much not even there's not even an argument that they have a worse resume.
You look at the teams that are behind them. There's some head scratching ones. This might be one of the worst 5 lines I've seen in a long time, and that excludes Michigan or includes Michigan, who probably got underseeded. They probably should have been a little bit better than a 5. But Oregon being a 5, I think, is also a bit outrageous. I don't think they deserve that seed either. So, I said no upsets. There are not many upsets going into this, but I think there's a couple of 12-5s that are on upset alert early.
And and Michigan being a 5, Mike, is just a great example of how little they care about the conference tournaments.
Absolutely.
I had them as my top 5 going in. I thought 3 quad 1 wins potentially moves them up 1 spot in my field, and it didn't. You see Oregon there too at the 5. They obviously had a great non-conference and good enough in the Big Ten where they were going to get probably a better seed than they deserved. But to see these, I've got now 6 teams here in the comparison area, and I know you can't see it, so it's a little tougher for you to follow along. But hopefully the viewers at home can. And there are just quite a few holes in this committee's final product here, and Gonzaga to be an 8 is quite interesting. They're 5-5 in quad 1. They have their elite quad 1A win. They have just 3 losses outside the top quad. They're 15-8 in meaningful games. To me, Mike, the 1 seed that has to play Gonzaga or Louisville if they win their first round is going to be the biggest, most disappointed in this, because a 1 seed does not deserve a 5 or 6 seed in the second round, and that's essentially what they're going to have here.
Auburn is going to have their hands full with Louisville, and similarly, Creighton.
Yeah, I don't think Creighton will be easy either.
No, I think both of those teams are good. Auburn, and you look at how much they've struggled in the last week and a half, 2 weeks since they clinched the regular season championship. They've struggled. This is not going to be a gimme Sweet 16 for them. And it won't.
And from the sheer volume of their quad 1 wins, it was tough to pull them off the number 1 overall seed. They were so far ahead of everybody that I don't think that they could have been caught. But there's a pretty good argument, Mike, that they are not the best team in the country right now.
No.
And I think both Duke winning their ACC tournament without Cooper Flagg and Florida rolling through the SEC tournament and winning that might have better chances to win it all than Auburn.
And we talk about, and this is where we talk at holes with the committee. We heard the committee say that Tucker DeVries not being healthy was a determining factor in West Virginia not getting into the tournament. However, Auburn not playing well coming down the stretch was not. Because at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, Florida right now is probably the best team in the country. And you ask, why does it matter if Florida got a 1, Auburn got a 1? Well, it matters because Florida's regional is in San Francisco. It is almost about as far as anywhere in the country is from Gainesville, Florida. That's a major city, other than maybe Seattle or Portland, right? So now Florida's fans have got to travel all the way across the country, and God forbid they got to go play the 3 seed Texas Tech in the Elite 8. Tech's going to have a bit of a home crowd advantage there, with it being a whole lot closer to Lubbock and having a pretty big fan base. So I think Florida should have gotten the South region and been able to have that home court advantage in Atlanta versus going all the way across the country to go play over there. But I think that was an interesting one, Sean. There were plenty of head scratchers. I think Drake getting an 11 was disappointing. What more could Drake have done this year? They went and they won their MTE. They went through the conference easily. Arch Madness was no problem, and they only get an 11 seed, which inferred that they would not have gotten in the tournament had they not won the championship game in Arch Madness. So,
and Mike, just one more thing with the 1 seeds before I want to move on. There was a report yesterday, and it turns out that sort of everything that came out yesterday was a total and complete lie. There was a report yesterday that Houston wanted the West region over the Midwest, and the Houston was the number 3 overall seed, and that would have made it so that Houston goes out west and Florida could be in the Midwest. That proved to be not true at all. Um, so a little bit of a puzzling one from the committee there. I think it would have been easier to just follow all the bracketing rules had you put Houston in the West, but they didn't. I think the 2, 3, and 4 seeds are pretty self-explanatory. I mean, the regions I had a little bit different, but 2 and 3 across the board were there. Michigan and Purdue, I had flopped on the 4-5. Purdue, it's clear that they put Purdue there for the whole body of work rather than sort of the finish.
Yep.
They haven't been playing terrible, but they haven't been playing very good either. And then we get into the middle seeds, and then when we turn to the away team or the teams wearing their away jerseys in the first round, I thought it was a little bit telling that Oklahoma got to sneak up onto that 9 line.
That is crazy.
That conference record is 6-12. Or no, maybe that was another team that we're going to talk about later.
No, they're 6-12 in conference.
So if you add their loss in the Big 12 tournament, they're 6-13 against Big 12 teams. Now that
SEC
hasn't
teams, yeah.
SEC teams. Sorry, that is obviously not good. It's not on the team sheet. People always say conference record doesn't matter, but in this instance, I think they're being rewarded for their non-conference strength of schedule. They did fairly well in Atlantis. I believe they won it, if I'm not mistaken.
They did. Yep, they did. They were undefeated in conference, out of conference.
Where they beat Louisville. I think West Virginia, Arizona was down there. I'm not sure if they played everybody. I think they played West Virginia too, but a little bit interested to see them sneak ahead of. I thought New Mexico was on the 9. Again, the Lobos down at the 10. I think 1 seed line off is pretty understandable here. Utah State and Arkansas on the 10 was pretty understandable for me, and then Vanderbilt ends up on the 10 line as the 5th to last team in. I had them either 5th or 4th to last in. But I do agree about Drake. Like I talked about it earlier today on the bracketology show, that I thought Drake would have been the highest ranked mid-major champion. Now that they're actually in the field, they have a win over an at-large team. They have 30 wins, decent resume numbers. I thought they had a chance to
I would have liked a 10 or 9 line for them.
I thought they had the resume to get above one of the power conference teams on the 10 line. And,
yeah, I agree.
But then we get to the last 4 in. Xavier and San Diego State were there for me and them. And then the 2 teams that I ended up not picking into my field, and this is going to take a long time to get through, Mike, because it has to be said. North Carolina getting in is truly sort of a middle finger to the entire college basketball community. The AD being the chair of the committee, it was a clear lack of integrity across the board from these committee members. And North Carolina had no business being in, and it's frankly a shame that this was allowed to happen.
You know, if North Carolina had actually gotten the job done against Duke, they would have been in the tournament, no questions. I don't think we'd be talking about this right now.
I don't think they would actually be in the first 4, because they do have really good, strong predictives.
They do, yes. And we would not be having this conversation right now. But you look at how poor they played in the ACC this year. Look, they played well coming down the stretch. They almost beat Duke the 3rd time without Cooper Flag. Like, that's awesome. That's cool. North Carolina did not deserve to be in the tournament this year. They should have absolutely been sitting at the NIT or whatever this new basketball tournament is that's postseason, and watching March Madness from their locker room. Metrics do not suggest they should have been in, and they did not perform well in a very poor conference. And it is really shocking to see, Sean, how a team like Louisville that was in the same conference, that played the same, teams, got, robbed with an 8 seed, but a team that was significantly worse than them, 5 more losses than them in the ACC, they get rewarded with only 3 seeds below them. It's crazy to me.
Yeah.
So,
and North Carolina, I said it before today, you can say the ACC wasn't the best. They had plenty of opportunities in their non-conference. They beat 1 tournament team, UCLA, on a neutral. They had 13 games against tournament teams. 6 of those were in the Big East. Now, 3 of them were Duke. But for them to get credit for almost coming back against Duke without Cooper
It's
Flag
crazy,
is quite ridiculous.
especially when the conference championships have been so devalued as they are. Look, the committee made it very clear this year that unlike college football, where we kind of got the understanding that maybe the out of conference strength of schedule didn't mean this much, the out of conference meant everything to this committee this year. Conference was a little less valued, where you have a 6-12 team and the conference get a 9 seed. But North Carolina didn't do anything and they're out of conference. They lost to Kansas. They lost to Auburn. They lost to Michigan State. They lost to Alabama. They lost to Florida. They they had so many opportunities. They barely snuck by Dayton. Otherwise, they would have been over at Maui. So I agree, Sean. I think it's pretty upsetting that North Carolina got in.
And the crazy thing is I think they're going to beat San Diego State. They're fast enough. They play at a high tempo where I do think that San Diego State likes to keep it slow and they don't score a ton of points. I do think North Carolina is going to beat San Diego State, but
I think they've got a good chance to get to the round of 32 as well. I think they've got a very very winnable game in the round of 32. So it might not happen, that they get shunned, but I think Ole Miss is pretty vulnerable.
yeah. So that we don't know which day will be which yet. If the times do come out, we will show them here. And then the other team getting in, Mike, and it was pretty clear that Texas was actually like way in the field. North Carolina was the team in limbo that would have been yanked if UAB had won today against Memphis. They end up not. Texas was the fourth to last team in. I went over it extensively earlier why they should be nowhere near the field. They finished 19-15 on the year, 12-15 in meaningful games. The non-conference strength of schedule near 300. The one non-conference game that they did play against good competition in Ohio State ended up not aging all that great because Ohio State did not make the field. There were some precedent-changing things with this Texas team, like 7 wins against the field, obviously much better than probably 80% of the teams in the tournament. You also have the fact that they were well under 500 in meaningful games. They did have a late season surge. And in this instance, it seems like the SEC tournament meant everything to Texas's inclusion. So I thought Texas did have a little bit of a better argument than North Carolina. I'm extremely surprised and disappointed to see Texas here along with North Carolina. But the Longhorns get in, and the SEC gets 14 out of their 16 teams into the dance.
Yeah, I think, the committee is setting a dangerous precedent by having so many 6-12 conference records in the NCAA tournament. I actually was really impressed with what Texas was able to do coming down the stretch in this season. But I would have thought that they would have been a lot closer to that last team in versus pretty comfortably in, right, going into today. So I think that was surprising. But look, at the end of the day, the SEC definitely got some love here from the committee. They got some teams that got a lot better season they should have. And I'll call that right out with Oklahoma and Mississippi State, in my opinion. But then also, like, Texas got in probably better than they should have. And Texas, I think they've got a pretty good chance to beat a Xavier team that I think has no business being in March in the first 4 before they take on Illinois. So I think that the SEC definitely got the benefit of the draw here.
And Xavier, I do think, had more of a case than both North Carolina and Texas. Xavier was pretty much like a slightly better version of North Carolina. So I do get if you're going to put Carolina in, you have to put Xavier in. They both have the one quad one win. Xavier does have 3 wins against the field. Some of those Big East home games ended up in quad 2 against, I believe, Creighton and UConn at home, and then Marquette was on the road. And Texas, with their 7 quad 1 wins, just one of them coming on the road against a tournament team. I know that was said to be a big deal in deciding the teams yesterday, Mike, but it's pretty clear that didn't have anything to do with it. This thing that they said that mattered the most was who did you beat, and it's going to hold more weight if it was away from home. And UNC has 1 neutral win against a tournament team. Texas has 1 win against a road team that's 1 seed line above them. And Xavier has 1 road win against a tournament team on the 7 line. So pretty much we can throw that out the door.
Yeah, this is it's pretty interesting. I think, Sean, we're going to get into pretty quickly the teams that didn't get in, and I think there are two teams that didn't get into this field that you can confidently say are better than, I think, at least three out of the four teams that were going to be playing in Dayton this week early on.
And those two teams, Mike, are West Virginia and Indiana. And earlier today, I did say I think the resumes are awfully similar between Vanderbilt, West Virginia, and Indiana, metrics wise, quad records, how their games fell wise. And it's clear that that resume was not given much respect at all by the committee. I'm obviously an Indiana fan. I'm very disappointed that they didn't get in. I'm more disappointed on the fact that I didn't get their prediction right to get into the field. We'll talk about how I sit in the matrix at the end, but I know that they deserve to be in. And look, the coach was already fired. I think maybe they could have got to the round of 32, but I don't think they could have won more than 2 games. This team deserved to be in, and it's not really going to make me sad once we get our new coach and start getting some players in the transfer portal. But it is disappointing to see some of the opportunities taken away from the seniors here. And for Indiana, Mike, yesterday, on CBS, the commissioner said the most important thing is who you beat, especially if it's on the road. Now, Indiana has 2 wins over protected seeds, an away win at Michigan State and a home win against Purdue. And none of the other bubble teams can say that they have 2 wins over protected seeds. So that's why that shift went so hard to Indiana in the last day. We saw the betting odds drastically shift. We saw Lunardi move Indiana up without playing. So it's very much like a total deep fake there by the committee. But let's talk about Indiana before we get into what I think is the bigger move in West Virginia. But
look, it just does not seem like the committee has like criteria that they're judging everything off of, because for some teams it's the out of conference strength of schedule that they were able to produce, or the quality of wins that they had against the bad losses they had. Other people like North Carolina, they did not have any quality wins this year. They kind of they won the games that it would have looked bad if they had lost, and that was it, right? But you look at Indiana, first off, a great end of the season. Despite losing early in the Big Ten tournament, they beat Purdue. They beat Ohio State, who was right on the bubble. They won 4 out of their last 6 games. But then you also look at a win at the Breslin Center against Michigan State. That's huge.
The only time they lost at home all year.
Exactly. A win against Purdue, like you said, a protected team. They almost beat Purdue again earlier.
They should have.
Yeah. And the 1-point loss to Maryland, that was a heartbreaker as well. So you look at how many, quality, I don't want to say quality losses, but how many games that could have been for them. You can play the same game that you played about, North Carolina a few days ago.
That's one of the biggest arguments for Carolina, is the reason why their predictives ended up so good is because they had a lot of close losses to good teams.
Right.
That same argument can be applied to Indiana too.
Yeah, exactly. And you look at their out of conference, and I understand that the out of conference for Indiana was not particularly impressive. Their only good win really was over South Carolina, who's last in the SEC. But win some big games is what the committee said, and Indiana did that. A huge win against Michigan State, win against Purdue. They should have been in, opposed to some teams that didn't have any big wins the entire year.
And we saw the conundrum with North Carolina and Texas, right? Carolina was rewarded for scheduling tough and not winning. Texas was rewarded for scheduling easy and winning. So,
yeah,
if you're an athletic director looking at this in the future, how do you schedule the non-conference the best way to prepare your team for Selection Sunday? And the answer to that question got a whole lot more complicated in the last couple of hours. New coaches, we saw Oklahoma last year left out without a very good non-conference schedule. So if you go to an MTE, Mike, you're not in control of who you play there. That's out of your hands. And it's also out of your hands how those teams do in the rest of their
the rest
season.
of the year. Yeah.
So, in these two teams, West Virginia and Indiana, both did go to the battle for Atlantis, but I think the race has kind of been run here in Indiana. It was a pretty clear consensus from the bracket matrix that they should have been in. I think it was 95 out of 111 people had them in. But Mike, the other team, 111 out of 111. Every bracketologist who submitted to the bracket project had the Mountaineers from West Virginia in. Committee thinks otherwise. Obviously, I'm very pissed off about Indiana because it's my team. I'm very pissed off about West Virginia too. This is ridiculous that they were able, that they can't go to the NCAA tournament. Mike, what are your thoughts?
This is the biggest robbery I've seen since watching and following college basketball, and it's not even close in my opinion. You look at a West Virginia team. Look, they lost in the first round of the Big 12 tournament to a not very good Colorado team. However, like we said, committee typically throughout the rest of this this seeding undervalued the conference tournaments, right? So what are we doing? But you look at the quality wins at Kansas. They beat Arizona. They beat Gonzaga. This was a team that had some very good wins. Beat Iowa State. They stumbled a little bit coming down the stretch, but also you're 10-10 in the Big 12. If you are 500 or better in the Big 12, you should be a shoe-in as long as you didn't flop in the out-of-conference. TCU, they were 9-11. They flopped in the out-of-conference.
West Virginia had a good non-conference, too.
They had an outstanding out-of-conference. They exceeded expectations at the Battle for Atlantis. I think they finished third there. The only loss was to a good Louisville team. And other than that, in the out-of-conference, their only loss was to Pitt. Pitt was a lot worse later on in the year, and I think if they played again in February or in early March, they probably would have beat him by 20 points instead of losing by over 20 points. So I think this was shocking, Sean, that a Big 12 team with this caliber that had a quality out-of-conference record got shut out of the big dance. It's very upsetting, and I think it's the biggest robbery that at least I've seen in my 20 years of covering basketball.
Yeah, it's my fourth year doing the Matrix and submitting my selections, and it is the first I think I've gone 67, 68, 67. This year I'm at 66. I ended up scoring fine, actually. I'll be curious to see where it ends up alongside the averages, but for something like this to happen and the reasoning behind it, I think there's a little bit of a disconnect with the committee from the actual situation here. They cited Tucker DeVries' injury as the main reason why he was left out. Think back to Jordan Travis and Florida State in college football. Tucker DeVries, Mike, I don't know the exact game that was his last one. I'll check it while you talk about why this was such a disappointing reason for the Mountaineers to be left out.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Tucker DeVries has not been playing for months. West Virginia has been playing without him since, I think, early January. So at least 16 of their 20 conference games were without Tucker DeVries. He may have been there for that big win against Kansas, but that would have been the only significant win that they had with Tucker DeVries. So look, they played the entire conference schedule. They had some bumps in the road, some teams they probably shouldn't have lost to, Arizona State, Kansas State. It is what it is. The Big 12 conference historically has been the best conference in the last 12 years or 10 years. It's probably the second best conference this year. It's close to the Big 10. If you're 500 in conference, you should absolutely been playing in March, especially when you have teams like Oklahoma and Texas that were 6-12 in league games and got in. 4 games worse than the Mountaineers. But the Mountaineers get shunned because of the affection for the SEC in this committee. So we'll see what happens for some of these SEC schools. I'll be curious to see what happens with Oklahoma and Texas. But this was a clear injustice and oversight by the committee to put West Virginia. And you wonder if they're going to boycott a follow-on postseason tournament with how shocking it is that they won't be playing for an NCAA tournament.
And Mike, just some more things on Tucker DeVries. He actually did not make it to conference play. His last game was Georgetown on December 6th. So he was there for Atlantis.
He played for a month.
2 Q1 wins he was there for, and 1 Q1 loss. So They were 4-9 in Q1 without him. That seems a whole lot better to me than 1-12.
Yeah, yeah. 1-12. That's North Carolina, right?
Yes, that is.
Yeah, one win in Q1 games, and they're in March. It's crazy,
So
crazy.
they didn't have much left in the non-conference. That win at Allen Fieldhouse was without Tucker DeVries, and if you remember all the way back, Mike, they had some plane trouble getting there, and
Yep, that was
some
crazy.
and two players missed through sickness.
They
You
got there like 6 a.m. and the game started at noon, I
Yeah,
think.
you can't take that one away from them. They have wins at Iowa at home against Iowa State without Tucker DeVries. They have a win at Cincinnati that was quad one. They have, um, a significant part of their four quad one wins without Tucker DeVries, and uh, I have a feeling there was some kind of miscommunication in the committee room about this. That seems like the only. And the other thing is, Mike, is I've got the team sheets up now. The net seemed to play a bigger deal this year than it did last year. I know we had a significantly less amount of bids because of the bid stealers. I mean, you had likes of Seton Hall, Oklahoma, and St. John's last year left out of the field with nets. I think St. John's was 22nd in the net last year, left out. That was kind of a middle finger to the net, and bracketologists didn't think that it was going to matter this much. You got Texas and North Carolina in the 30s, West Virginia and Indiana in the 50s. That seems to me like it's one of the only things that can be pointed to as to why these decisions were made.
Yeah. I just saw a pretty funny tweet, Sean, and it says UNC's athletic director going on TV talk about how UNC with one quad one win got in over West Virginia because Tucker DeVries was hurt 8 games into the season is art. And that's absolutely what this is. This is absolutely all about who the people are in the room in the committee. And I think there needs to be a lot of change with how the committee is set up. I don't know if I know the answers to this, but having athletic directors in the room for blue bloods that can determine if their school is making a lot more money, that should not happen, right? North Carolina's athletic director should not be even near the committee room. Nor should Duke, nor should Illinois or Alabama or Auburn or any of those athletic directors. So I don't know how you want to redo the committee, but you cannot have the amount of influence that UNC has to be the reason that they get into the tournament. It's because that's not right.
And he said on TV, "Oh, I wasn't in the room. They voted without me."
Sure,
you're spending 4 days with this guy. I think you're going to be nice to him, right?
There's
if you're not a total jerk, you're going to be nice to him. I mean, they've been there since I think Tuesday, so they've been spending a lot of hours together. And I think the answer to this, Mike, is a group of former players and former coaches who have no tangible connection to any athletic program anymore. That would be my suggestion. Now, while we're doing this, Scott Dolson, Indiana Athletic Director, if you want to be on it next year, go ahead and just make sure you're on it. But I think you got to keep them off of it. I mean, this is pretty clearly a conflict of interest, and I don't think it's I think they're going to win the first game, so I think people are going to say, oh, they should have made it. Well, yeah, so we did spend a lot of time there on the committee. I think they did a poor job. It seems like you agree, Mike. It seems like the vast, majority of college basketball fans agree. But, Mike, on the positive side, we do have a bracket out. We're going to get to this pretty quickly. I know we took almost a half an hour there on roasting the committee. It has to be done. But, Mike,
it did.
We've got a sort of not many surprises among the teams that will be significant underdogs in the first round. But let's start off with this, Mike. Which region do you think is going to be the toughest to make the Final Four out of?
I'm going to say it's the South region. And part of it is, look, Auburn's road is difficult. Having to play the 13th team in the country in your second game as a number one seed is really tough. But you also look at they've probably got the best 5 seed in Michigan. they've probably got the best 12 seed in UC San Diego. Iowa State, they've been cold lately, but they always perform well in March. And Michigan State is, you can make the argument, the best 2 seed in the country right now. So I think right now, looking at it, you go to the top of the bracket, and I think the South region is probably the toughest region right now.
I think the South region can have the biggest, I guess, sort of the most chaos.
Most volatility,
I
yeah.
think Michigan is playing very well at the 5 seed line. Michigan State is playing very well. Louisville's playing really well. Creighton is a good 9 seed. I think it's right to say that Louisville will probably win that game, but Creighton's going to have a chance against Auburn too, with Kalkbrenner going in there against Broome. New Mexico's underseeded at the 10. Then Lipscomb, we had them at 13. They got bumped to 14. That's a tough draw. Probably the toughest draw that Iowa State could have got. And then Yale beat a 4 seed last year in Auburn. And then UC San Diego on the 12 line. So, yeah, Mike, I agree. I think this is the most I would say I think the West region's actually going to be the toughest, but I think the South region will have the most chaos, which might actually make it easier to make the Final Four if you can get a little bit of those top teams out early. But
sure,
chaos region, I think, is the South so far.
And you look at the South right now, and no disrespect to Michigan, but I think another strong example of why teams shouldn't be playing their conference championship on Friday. Michigan's going to have to go play on Thursday. We don't have a time yet for when they'll play, but they're going to be playing UC San Diego on Thursday, which means that they're only going to have 3 days to prep for this game, which is quite a disadvantage, especially when winning the Big Ten Conference Championship didn't really mean anything to them.
And Mike, I think it might be in Seattle too.
Yeah. So
it's in Denver, Colorado, which and we do have some times, or that game is at 10 p.m. on Thursday the 20th on TBS. That's the first time that we have. But you see, that's what you get for winning the Big Ten. You get a short rest against a 30-win team.
A 30-win team, yeah.
It's not entirely fair. I thought Michigan did enough to get to the 4 line with a couple of those 4 seeds losing, but there also was sort of a bracketing rule thing. You see Purdue, Maryland, Michigan, and Oregon were separated. They're all in 4 different regions. It's to avoid them playing the round of 32. But wow, I think they're the clear losers of that 4 or 5 group. It's definitely Michigan.
Yeah, absolutely. And no disrespect to the Wolverines, right? They're a very good team.
Look, they still should beat UC San Diego, but
they should. But there's a very good chance that they don't.
Yeah,
UC San Diego is an outstanding basketball team, and there's a very good chance that Michigan's going home after 1 game on Thursday.
And they're 2.5-point favorites now, Mike. 2.5 points. That is
that's tight.
53% chance of winning if you look at it that way. So obviously, Joe isn't with us today. He'll be on our region recordings before the games actually start. But I have a feeling that he is not going to be the happiest after they kind of came out of nowhere to win the Big Ten tournament. Mike, I know the conference tournaments, especially these major ones that end on Sunday, they're not going to get the recaps from us that they probably deserve because, we've got the tournament now. But they sort of did shock everybody by doing that. Joe thought they would lose in the first game. I certainly didn't see them getting past the semifinals, and they win the entire thing. That's the thanks they get. Great job, committee.
Yeah. And by the way, side note, Big Ten tournament was by far the best, most entertaining tournament to watch this year.
I thought it was well, first of all, the top 8 teams all made it to the quarters, and then I think the quality of basketball, was actually pretty good, even though today was ugly because the teams were so tired and they shot awful. But I agree.
Fight, but
I agree.
Yeah.
All right, Mike. Well, I'm going to see if we can get some more times here, but if not, let's talk about the West region really quick. We've got Florida, St. John's, Texas Tech, Maryland, Memphis, Missouri, Kansas, UConn, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. Now, I know it's hard to see here. I didn't quite have time to make the region brackets, but in this 7-10, 2-15 pod in the West region, we've got Rick Pitino, Bill Self, John Calipari. And
Yeah,
no disrespect, but whoever the Nebraska Omaha coach is, 3 Hall of Fame coaches in that pod. This maybe Bill Self or John Calipari have a trick up their sleeve and bounce the Patino boys a little bit earlier than people think.
yeah, yeah. It is a loaded coaching region right there. You got three of the greatest coaches, I think, in the last 20 years, 25, 30 years even, right there. I want to see the Patino boys win.
Yeah,
Sean, it's one
they
of these things.
deserve a second weekend after this year.
Especially being robbed last year of where they were. I think it's good for college basketball to have New York's college team succeeding at the level that St. John's is, but it's not going to be easy. You look at how well Arkansas finished coming down the stretch against good talent. I think they're a sneaky team that get to the Sweet 16 or maybe even the Elite Eight if they can get a win against Texas Tech. I think Tech is not going to have any issues getting to the Sweet 16. I think they've got a pretty easy win against UNC Wilmington. And then regardless if they play Missouri or Drake, Missouri struggled a lot coming down the stretch. Drake's a great team. I thought they deserved better than an 11 seed, but I don't think they're going to be able to keep up with the physicality of JT Toppin and Texas Tech. So
Yeah,
I think
early upset pick for me. I actually think Drake matches up fairly well with Missouri.
yes, I agree.
And if Drake has to play Texas Tech 2 days later, I think that's a good matchup for Texas Tech. So I agree. I'd probably give Tech like an 80% chance to go to the Sweet 16.
I agree. I think they're a shoe in the Sweet 16. And I think they've also got a good chance at the Elite Eight. Early reactions from this is I've got Florida versus Tech in the Elite Eight. But we would love to see Patino come out and play well. This is going to be really interesting because there aren't too many teams that are in the West that are in the West region, aside for Colorado State the 12 and Grand Canyon University at the 13. And nobody else is in the West. There's actually probably more East Coast teams than there are West Coast teams in the West region.
And Mike, those teams are very unlikely to even make it to the part where they'd play in the West.
Exactly.
St. John's is in the West region, but that pod is Providence, Rhode Island. So
yeah.
I would say a pretty decent contingent of Red Storm fans will make it up there. Kansas and Arkansas, I mean, maybe you get a couple of fans there, but and then Omaha, that's a long way for Nebraska Omaha. But I think it is good for St. John's that game is closer. You can get on the train from St. John's and get to Providence in a couple of hours. I think that is part of the good draw for St. John's. But if there's a chance, Mike, that there's a couple East Coast teams playing in the Sweet 16 at the Chase Center in San Fran. But we have Memphis here, overseeded Memphis, overseeded Missouri, in my opinion. But, Mike, we've got the defending 2-time national champions in this region also.
Yeah.
Dan Hurley and UConn are going to face Porter Moser in Oklahoma in the first round. I got to say, I think this is a very good draw for the Huskies, at least to get to win a game.
Yes, I think UConn will absolutely get at least one win under their belt. Look, at the end of the day, Porter Moser's squad has not been winning games coming down the stretch, and it's really tough to flip that script. They've lost 13 of their last 19 games. That's not good juju going into March. So I do like Hurley. Obviously he's won 12 straight tournament games, so he's knows a thing or two about winning in March. And I think that could be a really good 8-1 matchup against Florida. Look, Florida is clearly the better team, but I could see UConn hanging around for a little bit and making that an interesting game going into the last 10 minutes of it.
And that pod, Mike, Florida, UConn, Oklahoma, and Norfolk State will be on Friday in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Yep.
So potential UConn-Florida matchup. Not entirely sure that will be a full Florida crowd. I think the Husky fans will get down there enough to make it not a true road game. That's Oklahoma UConn is at 9:25 on TNT on Friday night.
We've got all of our Thursday games times announced now.
Yeah, so let's go through those, Mike. I'll take the first 4, and then you can take the second sort of session here. We've got Creighton and Louisville kicking us off at 12:15 on Thursday on CBS. Obviously, they always pick a good first game. Should be a very good one. We've got High Point and Purdue in the second one here. The Fighting Huss Bus High Point Panthers. Let's see if they can do it. They're looking for win number 30. Purdue, 9.5 point favorites right now, not playing their best ball. Montana and Wisconsin at 130. That'll be in Denver, Colorado also. So long way from home for the Badgers, who they didn't win today, Mike. They did play 4 games in 4 days, and they get the short rest day too. So maybe some tired legs there. Clearly, John Tanji was a little banged up today. And then the end of the first session here is SIUE against Houston from Wichita. The Cougars, 30.5 point favorites right now. But, Mike, obviously the first two stand out, and we should probably get through this pretty quickly because we're getting a little bit late on time here.
A little long on time.
Why don't you take the second session here on Thursday?
Yeah, absolutely. So keep going down the line. We got a 2:50 on Thursday. You've got Auburn that's going to play a game against the winner of
Alabama State, St. Francis.
Yeah, in St. Francis, Pennsylvania. So a couple teams that have very little tournament experience will be going up against Janiah Broome as Auburn tries to get their first national championship, get back to the Final Four for the first time since 2019. After that, McNeese State versus Clemson, two teams that are coming back to the dance from a year ago. McNeese got bodied in a game that they expected to play well. This could also be Will Wade's final game as the coach at McNeese State. I think he would be a pretty hot coaching hire this offseason. So Clemson trying to get back to the Elite Eight as they did last year. Keep it on going down in the East region. We've got VCU taking on Brigham Young University. BYU's really hot right now. You know, about 3-4 weeks ago, this was a bubble team. Now they're sliding in with an easy 6, and they also had a couple of good wins in the Big 12 tournament. So they're sitting there. Georgia's back in the NCAA tournament. That's going to be the next game at 4:35 in the Midwest region. They're going to be taking on Gonzaga. That'll be an interesting one, Sean. I like Gonzaga early on looking at it, but Georgia, they played really well coming down the stretch.
Yeah, Mike, that session rocks.
Yeah.
Early reaction. Auburn, I hope for them that they take care of business. The other 3 games should be awesome, but we're going to get more into the matchups in a later episode. We've got session 3 on Thursday, Wofford and Tennessee. Tennessee, significant favorites there. Arkansas and Kansas, 7-10 on Thursday. They usually hold this spot for a pretty good game. No different this year. Yale, Texas A&M at 7:25. That'll be in Denver, so the Aggies should have some fans there. And then Drake and Missouri, again, session 3 is pretty good too here, Mike, off the initial reaction. We've got that's in Kansas also. That's pretty close to both of the schools, honestly, but that sessions 2 and 3 on Thursday. Pretty good ones.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is a great one. I think you're going to get into that final session. Well, the third session I think is the best when you look at Drake, Missouri. That's going to be played during that time, as well as Arkansas, Kansas. I think those are going to be 2 of the better games. I will give the committee some sort of credit here. We've got some awesome round 1 matchups on Thursday. We've got a lot of really, really competitive, good basketball games. I'm really excited to watch.
I think we have most of the good ones on Thursday. We haven't.
Yeah.
And session 4, you can take us through, Mike. We've got maybe 1 or 2 good ones there too.
Yeah. So Utah State taking on UCLA in this one. I'm not as excited about this game. It's in the Midwest region. That'll be a late game, so you'll have a little bit more of a UCLA crowd there. But 2 West Coast teams playing there. Omaha,
in Lexington, Kentucky, by the way. So a long way from both those schools.
Long way from home, but they got to wait until 9:30 to play, which is kind of annoying. 9:45 Eastern time. You've got St. John's taking on Omaha. Sean, we said that game's going to be in Connecticut, so that'll be easy travel for fans of the Johnnies. Then you've got one of the interesting ones. We talked about it. 12-5 matchup, UC San Diego taking on the Michigan Wolverines. This game is in Denver, Colorado at Ball Arena. So in terms of a travel perspective, UC San Diego has the advantage. They also have a lot more rest. But regardless, Michigan will still have more fans. You wonder if altitude is going to play a factor in this because Michigan has not played many games in altitude this year. They're going to be tired to begin anyway since they just had to run through the Big Ten tournament. A lot of concern for the Wolverines in this game, Sean.
Yeah, it's. I'm not saying it's like definitely going to be an upset pick of mine, but with how close analytically these two teams are, the legs aspect of it, the altitude aspect of it, this is might be close to a coin toss off of my initial reaction.
100%, 100% agree with you, Sean. 100%.
All right, Mike.
And
Let.
final game
Oh yeah,
to
yeah.
kick
You got
off
one more.
to end the night is going to be Texas Tech versus UNC Wilmington. Wilmington back in the tournament for the first time since 2017, taking on a pretty hot Texas Tech squad. However, they have struggled to close some games recently.
All right, Mike. Well, let's turn the page to Friday, and I'm going to give you session one here, because starting it off is the Baylor Bears.
Absolutely. 12:15, Raleigh, North Carolina. I'll be there. It's going to be the Baylor Bears taking on Mississippi State. Chris Jance's squad coming in. They're getting an 8 seed. They've had a little bit of an up and down year, but expectations in Starkville are typically pretty low. So it's good to see Mississippi State back in the tournament for a second straight season. After that, you've got Robert Morris taking on Alabama. That's going to be at 12:40, followed by Lipscomb taking on Iowa State. Lipscomb, remember, went through an NIT run a few years ago and almost won that one. So they're back in March Madness. And the final one in this quadrant is going to be Colorado State and Memphis. So pretty lukewarm start, I think, to Friday.
Yeah, and Colorado State and Memphis is all the way in Seattle. So not entirely.
11 a.m. start time.
Yes, so 11 a.m. local, not entirely far from Las Vegas or Fort Collins, depending on where the Rams are coming from. But Mike, they played a bunch of games there too in a couple of days, and Memphis finished today. They did play 3 games. So initially, I have a feeling, Mike, that BYU may have been the final 5 seed, and they were moved for the not playing on Sunday rule. That is an initial guess.
It's not really a rule, unfortunately, but yeah.
Well, it's their rule. BYU can't play on Sundays.
Oh,
so,
yeah, sorry. Yeah, you're right.
But I have a feeling that is why Memphis ended up so high, because maybe BYU, this is the obviously Friday, winner plays on Sunday. Maybe that's just an initial thought.
Not a bad initial thought, by the way, I would say.
Session 2, we're starting off with Duke and the winner of American and Mount St. Mary's. I'm a little bit surprised to see American in this game. I thought they were a little bit clear of SIUE, and the Mount St. Mary's coming out of the MAC.
I agree.
Total chaos in the MAC tournament. We had the 4 seed losing to the 6 seed in the championship, but Mount St. Mary's gets to the dance for the first time since 2021. Game 2 here, 3:15 p.m. Eastern Time, Vanderbilt and St. Mary's. An interesting one from the Rocket Mortgage Arena in Cleveland. Ole Miss playing the winner of North Carolina and San Diego State. Yes, that's right. Milwaukee, so not a super long journey from Ohio to Wisconsin for the winner. I know when Indiana was in the first 4 a couple of years ago, they sent us to San Jose, California from Dayton in 48 hours. Not very kind of them.
Not at all.
Like they've learned their lesson a little bit there. And rounding out session 2 is Grand Canyon against Maryland in Seattle also, Mike. So Maryland is a team that plays 5 players. You've got a super long journey. Initial thoughts here that there might be something to this game.
Absolutely. When I was looking at this quadrant of games, I said look out for GCU. They've got tournament experience. Bryce Drew has been successful coaching and playing in the NCAA tournament for that matter. And you look at, they're at a conference. They did beat Stanford. They had a very narrow loss against Georgia and a very, very narrow loss against Arizona State as well. So you look at, they've got experience against tournament teams. It's going to be pretty easy travel for the Lopes. I could see them getting the upset against Maryland.
In Maryland, they haven't really once had foul trouble issues, and you just think that the water's going to find its level. It's got to happen eventually. Maybe it might happen here. All right, session 3, Mike.
If Maryland wins this game, I think they've got a pretty comfortable movement to the Sweet 16 because I think they match up really well against Memphis, but I don't want to
or
work too far ahead.
or Colorado
Or
State
Colorado
too.
State.
But
Yeah,
yeah, Mike, we've got session 3 on Friday. Why don't you take us through that?
absolutely. So session 3 on Friday. That is going to start us off with Norfolk State taking on Florida. So Florida, they're getting the West region. This game will be close-ish to home for them. It's going to be played in Raleigh, North Carolina at the Lenovo Center, so they'll be able to get some of their fans in to this game. Next up, you've got Kentucky playing Troy. The Trojans are back in the dance for the first time in a couple of years. Kentucky, let's see if they can kind of shake off these tournament woes that they've had the last few seasons. I will voice the same concerns I've had with them all year. They're not great at defending the basketball, and that could be an issue against Troy. Um, keep it on going. We got 2 more games to final out this session. Marquette taking on the Fighting Rich Patinos in New Mexico. So that game will be 9:25 in the South region. So that could be a really competitive game, especially because Shaka has struggled in March in the last 10 or so years. And then to round out, we've got Akron taking on Arizona at 7:35.
Yeah, a couple interesting ones in that session. Mike, this is the same place that Kentucky found themselves in last year, in a 3-14. You can
Yep.
change the coach, you can change the players, but it doesn't seem like Kentucky can run from this 3-14 game. So hopefully, for their sake, they get over the hump and get the job done. Um, we have Marquette going to Cleveland. They can't obviously play in their home arena at the Pfizer Forum, so they've got to go somewhere else. Um, and then session 4 on Friday night, Mike, we have got Oklahoma and UConn starting off session 4. UConn slight favorites already. That's also in Raleigh. Then we've got Illinois playing the play-in winner, and that makes me think, Mike, that both the 11 seed games might be on Wednesday. If
It
that makes
must be.
sense, they have to be. Um, but we can go to that in a second.
Nope, only one. Texas Xavier's on Wednesday. Tuesday is North Carolina, San Diego State.
Okay, so I think North Carolina. I think three of the play-in winners are playing on Friday. Then, if that makes sense.
Yep, it appears that way. Yeah,
Yeah, so that's a little bit interesting. You don't see that very often, but they get an extra day. North
yeah.
Carolina or San Diego State will get an extra day on Ole Miss. But here we are with Illinois. They will play the winner of Xavier and Texas at 9:45 p.m. in Milwaukee also. So still both of the winners of the Dayton games are going to be going to Wisconsin. It's good that they don't have to go to Seattle or something like for that
Yeah.
example. Potentially Illinois getting obviously a scout of the tournament games there. And then we've got Bryant and Michigan State, 10 p.m. in Cleveland, Ohio. Pretty close to Michigan. Should be a very pro-Spartan crowd there. And the final game of the round of 64, Mike, we've got the Liberty Flames against the Oregon Ducks in Seattle. And Oregon, potentially the only team going to Seattle that's actually happy about it. But with it being so far away, or so close to Oregon, you have to think that initial thoughts for me is that this is the least likely 12-5 upset.
It absolutely is, especially because Oregon. It's almost like a reward for traveling as much as they've had to this season. They get a little bit of a break here. They get to kind of hang out in the area to take on the Liberty Flames. It's going to be a clear home crowd favorite there. The one thing about Oregon, they have been mighty inconsistent this year. They played well coming down the stretch this year, so they got that going for them. But they haven't necessarily taken care of home crowd advantage at some points this year, Sean. Remember when they lost by over 30 points to Illinois? They don't want to stay at home. Who
Yeah.
knows? It doesn't necessarily.
Oh, did we lose you, Mike?
Nope, I'm back.
Yep. Okay.
We'll see what happens
Yeah.
with Oregon's so-called home field advantage.
And this is Climate Pledge Arena, not where Washington plays, but Oregon has already been up there and won, I believe. Yeah, not too long ago. So they're going to be going back to Seattle. Mike, just under the hour mark. That's all we have for them today. We'll obviously have more previews and stuff coming out before the games, and then obviously a ton of content when the games do start. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this quick reaction. Please be sure to like all the Instagram posts, like the stream, subscribe to the YouTube.